this Futuwwah or chivalry, in essence, it's a code of honor. All men are males, but all of them are not men. He outwardly looks like a male, or as Mr. Andrew Tate would say, a top G. Doesn't necessarily make a person a real man. Really, there's a metaphysical reality behind being a man. It's not just physical. Nuclear family is detrimental to raising young males to being men. In Western society, a war on traditional masculinity. So the Red Pill movement, for instance, talks about women almost as being like commodities. I think the Red Pill movement actually is unmanly. A real man should be willing to give his life for his wife's.
Never in human history has the role and position of men and women been subject to so much dispute. The advent of liberalism has ushered in an era of free thought and individualism that has removed previously accepted notions of traditions and obligations. Liberal feminism has explicitly sought to forward a hollow version of equality that has, on the whole, harmed women and men. And sadly, the backlash has been a crude assertion of masculinity that loathes women and removes any of their rights. Social media is awash with a morass of failed gender relations and gender conflicts to which many young Muslims, however well-intentioned, contribute. Imam Dawud Walid has recently published a serious contribution to the subject of manhood. The sacred idea of chivalry may look out of place in modernity. He has recently authored a brilliant book, as I said, titled Futuwwah, Raising Males into Sacred Manhood. I think a timely contribution to the topic, and he's our guest today, Imam Dawud Walid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
It's probably your fourth time now on the Thinking Muslim, I think. Alhamdulillah, we spoke last during the American elections. So Jazakallah khair. I mean, you're in the UK today, and I think you're here for a conference in a weekend. So it's really wonderful that you've come to our studio. First time in the studios.
Yes, first time in the studio.
Well, you've written this book on Futuwwah, chivalry in Islam. Let's start with what chivalry means, because of course, the term chivalry comes, to my British mind, it's sort of, you go back to kings and queens of England, where you've got, guys in robes who open doors for women. Like, what is chivalry in an Islamic context?
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. So I'll deal with the term Futuwwah more so, which, we're loosely translating that as sacred chivalry, right, or we could even call it Islamic chivalry. Futuwwah is somewhat of an elusive term. And we translate it as sacred chivalry. Yeah. But linguistically speaking, it's related to the word fatah or fityan, which is a conglomeration of the fatah. And it puts in our mind that there is an individual that has youthful vigor, that is transitioning out of one stage of personage to a greater stage of responsibility, right? So moving out of this like adolescent or childish age into an age of more maturity. Even the word fatawa, even is linguistically related to Futuwwah, of one who has a level of discernment as well as education to be able to give a particular legal opinion that is not just abstract or speculative, but based in some sort of evidence, which also includes experiential or the facts on the ground. So this Futuwwah or chivalry, in essence, it's a code of honor. It's a code of conduct that a young man who is seeking to be chivalrous, how the peak of it is to prefer others over oneself, right? So this is where we could say the chivalry comes in. Like, I think I read some story growing up in the States, maybe it was some British folklore about how someone came and there was a damsel who was walking, and then there was a puddle of mud or something, some water, and he takes off his kisa or his cloak and then throws it on the ground so that she doesn't get her feet muddy,
Yeah.
which is, we could say, is a type of chivalry. But this term goes beyond these sorts of just social norms or etiquettes, but it's something that is a something that's spiritual, that transcends or manifests itself into a very real social and even has political implications.
How does chivalry differ to masculinity? We're all, men are built differently. Biologically, they're different to women. And naturally, we acquire certain strengths and certain attitudes as we grow up, as we grow older, as we mature. How's that different to what you're calling for, sacred chivalry?
Well, that's a very good question. So the term Futuwwah was a term that was used by the Salaf, the early generations of Muslims, and it's been written by and elucidated on by many scholars. In Madarij Salikin, for instance, by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya al-Hanbali, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has a section on Futuwwah. So this is a term that comes from a classical period. A term in Arabic would be arajula. That's not a term that was used in the classical tradition. We won't find where the tabi'in or the tabi'in ever used this term.
Yes.
Or Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmed didn't use this type of term. But we have some sort of conception of this. What and I quoted in this book, one of our scholars in America, and actually who I've taken hadith from, Dr. Sheikh Muhammad bin Yahya Ninawi al-Halabi, is originally from Syria. May Allah bless the people of Syria. He said that all dhukur are not rijal, meaning all males are not men. So all men are males, meaning in their physiology and their biology, but all of them are not men, meaning that when we're talking about this issue of manhood, there are certain traits that one may call rajula that, of course, women can display, but in their fullness of what it means to be a true rajul, this is something that is exhibited through the personage of a biological male, right? However, just because one has reached the age of being mukallaf, according to the Sharia, meaning 15 or older, let's say a guy's 30 years old, he has a beard, he has a deep voice.
Yes.
He outwardly looks like a male, or as Mr. Andrew Tate would say, a top G, or the late Kevin Samuels would say, a high-value man. Just because that person has muscles and works out 5 days a week, or makes over 100,000 American dollars, or was it 85,000 British pounds a year, or whatever that would be, right? Doesn't necessarily make a person a real man, right? Because there is an inward reality that has to manifest, and it's based on what we could say is this notion that Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, talked about of the wasat, right? That it is virtue that exhibits itself outwardly, but virtue is in the middle, or i'tidal is in the middle. Anything that is too far to the right, which is al-ifrat, or too far to the left, which is a tafrit, being grossly excessive or grossly negligent, would not be a man. So for instance, we use this example, or I'll use some American terms. You could have a brute or a punk, right? A brute or like a fir'aun is not a real man.
Yes.
But someone who's punctified, who is cowardly, he doesn't take on any responsibility, that's not a man in the true sense either. And this masculinity that we're talking about, and again, it's not to slight the women, right? But even some of these traits that we have a Futuwwah that women can have, the expression of it cannot be like a man. And also there's certain, what we could say, jamali traits of spiritual beauty that men have, but aren't expressed the same way that women express them, right? And the Sharia respects this. This is why there are certain obligations that men have according to the Sharia
Yeah.
that women simply don't have. And it's not a slight upon women, but there's a metaphysical reality behind being a man. It's not just physical. And no matter how hard I would want to try to play the role of a mother of my children, I can't be a mom because I'm not a woman. And likewise, no matter how hard a woman wants to try to fill certain social roles, as a chivalrous man, she can never be a man, right? Because she's not a dhakr. And in order to be a rajul, in a true sense, a rajul haqiqi, you have to be a dhakr.
So Futuwwah is there are a series of virtues that a person inwardly imbues as well as externally exhibits. And these virtues have to be taught. They're not naturally acquired because of your biological character or your physiological change at the age of 15 or 16 or wherever. These have to be taught. So do we see signs of the Prophet ﷺ in the early message teaching these virtues to the early companions, who were many of them were very young?
Yeah, most definitely. So you touched on a very important point. So all children, male and female, are born upon el-fitra, right? And the Prophet said this, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Kullu ma yuladu ala al-fitra." Every child is born upon the intrinsic, pure, primordial nature, right? So we don't believe that children are born sinful. At the same time, this is what we have of the term tarbiyah. There has to be some sort of raising up, just like in the word tarbiyah is linguistically related to Rabb, like Rabb al-Alameen. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the one who created us, who nurtures us and raises us up by degrees and sustains us. Likewise, in the tarbiyah, there has to be certain levels of steps in the upbringing and raising up to make a boy become a man. We can see where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam was involved in this tarbiyah. Now we know that his biological sons all died. They didn't make it to the age of being what we could say mukallaf according to the sacred law. The two examples, however, the two closest examples we can see, however, of how he raised up chivalrous men and brought them through this tarbiyah would be Ali ibn Abi Talib and Zayd ibn Haritha, radiyallahu anhuma. Why? Because Ali, at a very young age, Abu Talib, as we know, went through financial troubles or issues. He sent Ali to live in the house in Beit Khadija, radiyallahu anha, with the Prophet alayhi salam at a very young age, right? So hence, Ali never worshipped idols because there was never any wathaniya or idolatry in the home of Khadija, radiyallahu anha. And then Zayd, who was like a foster son to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we see this. So we see that there was not just rearing as far as teach, but there was an embodiment where they literally absorbed certain characteristics from the hal of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is what we see, the transference of this Futuwwah, that everything just can't be taught by word, or everything just can't be learned from like just picking up a book, that this is an endeavor that is modeled, and there's a type of spiritual transference of young men benefiting from the healthy spiritual states of other men that mold them, kind of like how steel sharpens steel, right? So Ali is known in many of the books of Futuwwah classically as Sayyidul Fityan. He is the master of the chivalrous young men after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And why is this? Because he benefited from the one who had the best hal, which is the Prophet alayhi salam.
That's really interesting. So this is a discipline that's imbued in young people. So you've written a book on this subject, and you've just said there that this is not a discipline you can just read. One needs to model it. One needs to be immersed in an atmosphere. So is this is your authoring of this book, your authorship of this book, a recognition that that atmosphere is missing in many of our Muslim communities, especially those in the West?
Definitely. The reason why it was written was an observation that a number of us have seen, and also a plea or a cry for help. Yeah. And particularly in my area in southeastern Michigan, in the United States of America, where single mothers were coming to us either because their husbands died and they didn't have any other male family members around, or the father divorced or checked out of the son's lives, that there was a recognition that there was not enough male mentorship, and hence this issue of mama's boys, delayed adolescence, even seeing youth, young men getting involved in drugs and gang activity. And that was because not enough of the steel sharpening steel. So in the city of Detroit, and we mentioned this in the introduction, that we started, a group of brothers, we started a weekly Futuwwah reading, and then we built upon that with other activities of intergenerational mentorship. So then we brought in archery on Saturdays, or we could call this prophetic athletics, we could say, or sacred athletics. We brought in martial arts because grappling is something that the Sahaba did. May Allah be well pleased with them. And I mean, the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we started organizing other activities, primarily through the Zawiyah of Dar Rahma, led by Sheikh Abdul Kareem Yahya Hafidhullah Ta'ala, who's one of the students of Habaib in Turin. Camping trips, and other activities to try to pass on the benefit that we got from our elders, not from our teachers, that we want to pass on to the youth.
I want to understand, why is it that there's such important ideals, or these sets of important virtues have not been passed on to our current generations? Like, what is it that severed that that connection with our elders and our forefathers, where we no longer have Futuwwah as a taught discipline within our communities? We haven't lost Salah, we haven't lost fasting, we haven't lost Hajj, we haven't lost some of these ahkam that are very crucial to being a Muslim. Yet, in this particular area, there seems to be an absolute, disconnection between generations. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, there's a big answer to that, to that
We have
question,
time.
but there's a lot to it. So I'll start off with some of the unintentional aspects, and then I'll go to what I think is some deliberate things. So unintentional is a product of modernity in the West, right? It's a part of it, right? For instance, some of the vigor that young men would go through. For instance, I'll give you one prime example, that I come from a family of people that would grow food and also hunt. When you live in a place like London or New York City, Detroit, you don't go hunting. You don't go regularly and slaughter food. You go to the butcher. You go Uber Eats. You can go to the butcher.
Yes.
You don't even know how to do a proper dhabiha, right? Or ever do udhiyah in your life.
Yeah.
You can go to the butcher shop. You can get your meat. You can get everything as convenience. And so some of these things that also are rites of passage for a young man, knowing how to go out and hunt, knowing how to slaughter an animal and how to dress the animal properly. These were types of things that were taught and almost like rites of passage. Most of that has been erased, especially living in big cities and in modernity in the West. This is something that's just, it's just by, I won't say happenstance, but it's by living in the environment. Also going to schools. I don't know about in Britain, but I can tell you United States and Canada, children that go to public schools, and this could even be the case in a lot of private Muslim schools, you have young males for 6 or 7 hours a day may have nothing but female teachers growing up. And they may be fine when they're in elementary school, but when it comes to the age of when they're coming into their developmental years of growing up to be a young man, and then from middle school to the high school age, and they're around nothing but feminine energy, they're not even around men to even see manly behavior. They're around but females the entire time, right? And again, women can mean well and do motivation, but women simply cannot give the same amount of vigor or rigor, generally speaking, and that type of commanding presence that men will give. I mean, it's something natural that when a young man, and I've seen it in my mentoring and things, where a woman can raise their voice at her son and young men, and then a man comes in the room that's like, who works out, who has a deep voice, and he commands a certain type of, his heba is different. He commands a certain type of respect, right? So, I mean, so these are certain things too from the disciplinary track, but even just the modeling of manhood, right? So this is another thing, and this is kind of another aspect, which is somewhat unintentional in the school systems. And something else is that Muslims have unintentionally adopted, to our detriment, many of us, the concept of nuclear family. Nuclear family is detrimental to raising young males to being men. Of course, the African proverb is like, it takes a village, right, to raise a boy to be a man. But we traditionally in Islamic societies came from an extended family where you have living close by or even in the same house 3 different generations, and you have uncles and people living close by. Now, in this age of the Western modernity, people don't live in the same homes normally intergenerationally, or the uncles and the older cousins live far away, maybe in a different city, maybe even in a different country. So that network of reinforcement and manly tutelage is not present, because many times we have gone to the nuclear family, and it's even exacerbated or gotten worse with the increase of single parent households, of mothers doing their best, working, scrambling to raise 2 or 3 children all by herself, right? So these are things that are unintentional. What I believe is intentional that has taken place is that I believe that there is in Western society a war on traditional masculinity.
Right.
This stems out of neo-Marxist thought.
Yes.
We have things such as critical studies, which not only critical race theory came out, but critical gender studies.
Right.
So one prime example, people will grow up and teachers in school have learned the pedagogy, or it's even taught in liberal arts schools. You'll hear a term in critical gender studies called toxic masculinity. Now, that's a problematic term, and that negatively affects women, how they see masculinity, but also how males see themselves, right? And of course, there's no term called toxic femininity. This is done intentionally, and we would say there's nothing inherently toxic about masculinity. The term has no credence, just like we would never say Islamic terrorism, because by nature, if it's terrorism, it can't be Islamic.
Yes.
Right? So this is a problem. So there is a type of pedagogy that's sought to disconnect males from traditional masculinity. This comes from outside. Then also, we have to come to terms that admit that Muslims ourselves have been disconnected from our tradition, and this was also something intentionally done by colonialists and neo-colonialists. And sometimes we adopt or look at Islam in a very autodidactic, almost Protestant tradition type of way, right? So the whole tradition of asanid and being connected to chains of transmission, and not just for ilmi purposes or for knowledge, but also to be connected to chains of narration where men take from men that also learn the adab of the teacher, who also benefit from the ahwal, the spiritual states of those teachers, has been disconnected. And in many places in our community, and I've traveled around quite a bit, we'll teach a little bit of fiqh in our centers, because the majority of Muslim children don't go to Islamic schools to begin with. They teach a little fiqh of halal, haram, maybe how the fiqh of tahara, somewhat proper, how to make salah, how to fast Ramadan, a little less aqidah, and maybe that's taught incorrectly, and then little to no emphasis on ilm suluk and akhlaq, on spiritual welfare, in which this discipline of Futuwwah has a direct connection to the knowledge of spiritual welfare that's not just learned by picking up books, but is also learned from the spiritual states of teachers. So this disconnect was purposely placed in the Muslim mind, and then we ourselves have been reproducing almost neo-colonial frameworks of how we even view our own tradition, how we even talk about Islam.
Right.
Right. So all of this is, I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but I believe all of these things are connected.
Jazakallah khair. Now, how much are you responding to the current debates of sort of the red pill movement, where you've got people like Andrew Tate who argue a certain form of masculinity, and many believing Muslims, many practicing Muslims have embraced and adopted that form of masculinity?
Well, this book is a subtle response to that. I've done several workshops, and we've discussed this in a number of localities and cities, and Mr. Andrew Tate's name had been brought up specifically. So what we do, man, in these discussions, we have to reset things. So we say that the figure for sacred masculinity, the primary figure, is Al-Habib al-Mustafa Muhammad alayhi salam. Kana lakum fi rasulillahi uswatun hasana. He is the model. He's the beautiful model of this sacred masculinity. And his view of how he talked about human relations and how he dealt with women is very different from the red pill movement. So the red pill movement, for instance, talks about women almost as being like commodities or being properties. A real man seeks to be responsible and a caretaker for women. So one can't be a high value man or a real man who never been married, who has no responsibility about women, right? Or who talks about women as if they're property. That has nothing to do with the Quran and Sunnah. Some of this has to do with resetting. The Prophet ﷺ was described as وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, right? So as a loving, compassionate mercy for all the worlds, which includes dealing with children, which includes dealing with women, which includes dealing with elderly. So there's a time to be firm. There's a time to be resolute in times of hostility. But generally speaking, this endeavor of Futuwwah that we point back to the Prophet ﷺ and our teachers is about kindness, is about generosity, is about preferring others over ourselves, which includes preferring not just physical comfort, but also even preferring the feelings of women, right? That we don't try to intentionally hurt women's feelings by talking rough to them and talking down. If I can just give a couple of examples of this, just very briefly, right? Because we're talking about this whole thing about red pill, and actually, I think the red pill movement actually is unmanly because it lowers manliness only down to the level of emetdia or materialism, and that's good. It's good. I mean, it's important in the sense that men need to work, right? Men need to go out and get educated and like get a job. Physical fitness is also very important. Grooming is also very important, but we're talking about metaphysical traits that inform physical manifestations. So we're talking about being a man. So for instance, one well-narrated incident, and this can be seen in Ihya Ulumuddin, because it's been, I'm pointing to this because this has been translated into English. So in the book of marriage, we know that the Prophet ﷺ used to like the cooking of one particular wife. And we know that some of the wives got jealous of other wives, right? So one of the wives, and I'm not mentioning any the wives' names out of adab, but I could because they're mentioned in the narrations, right? The Prophet ﷺ had some of his beloved companions, may Allah be well pleased with them, at the home. And so one of the wives who had the nice dish brought over the food, but it was in the home of the other wife. The wife got jealous and turned over, knocked the pot of food and wasted all on the floor, right? Did the Prophet ﷺ stand up and supposedly put her in a place of, woman, what you doing? You're embarrassing me in front of my house guests, in front of these men, in front of the companions. Oh, go clean that up and clean that pot up. Clean that pot off the ground and go get us some food. That wasn't his disposition at all. He empathized with her ghera, with her protective jealousy, and he just said, your mother, Fulana bint Fulan, she's jealous, right? All right. Now, who would say that he's not a real man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? That's the way that he handled it. He had emotional intelligence, and he handled it not in a harsh way. Another example, same wife. And this is the gentle way of how he would also lead by example, right? Because a man with his women folk is supposed to lead by example, right? Not just do as I say, but also do as I do. So it's known, and this is narrated Sahih Muslim, and also in other narrations, Hadith Sahih. The Prophet ﷺ would be walking in Medina, and there was a group of the Jewish folk, and to clarify, not all the Jewish folk, some of the Jewish folk would tell him, death be upon you. So one day he's walking with the same wife, Radwan anha, may Allah be well pleased with her. They say to him, As-samu alayka ya Abul Qasim. Death be upon you, O father of Qasim. She says back, and death be upon you. Another riwayah, it says, and death be upon you. Oh, in God's curse, his latna means removal of all mercy, divine mercy, and ghadab, in God's anger, God's wrath. The Prophet ﷺ said, Mahlan, calm down. Inna Allaha rafiqun yukulli rifq. Inna Allaha rafiqun yuhibbu rifq fi amri kullihi. Calm down. Surely Allah is kind, and he loves kindness in every endeavor, every matter. Another riwayah says, "Inna Allaha rafiqun yuhibbul rifq wa yu'ti al-rifqi ma la yu'ti al-unf." Surely Allah is kind, and He loves kindness. And He gives to the kind what He doesn't give to the violent. So this is, I think, the first reference I've ever seen in human history where the word al-unf is used for words, rhetorical violence. So words can be violent because the Prophet said so, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Reason why I'm bringing this up is that he was kind in his correction. So she was like, well, what should I say? He's basically paraphrasing. If you have to say anything back, just say wa alaikum, basically back at you. Yeah. If you have to say anything back. So, kind correction. Na'udhu billah min dhalik, we would never say the Prophet ﷺ was a coward. Yes. He was never a punk. He had political authority in Medina. He could have had those Jewish people whipped for those words. He could have had them banished for those words, right? But he wasn't a top G with them. And he didn't say to her, he didn't cheer her on for speech that was inappropriate, nor when he found her speech to be inappropriate, did he chastise her, shame her, and harshly rebuke her.
That's really interesting. I mean, how would you then respond to, I don't know, there may be some people who watch today's conversation and say, well, you know, we live in a world where men have been sidelined and their roles and responsibilities have been completely maligned in this sort of modernity. And, you know, what you're talking about, this sensitivity, this type of approach to women and approach to others, you know, that is all part of this plan to emasculate the man and make them even weaker in the face of this ideology. I mean, how would you respond to such a criticism?
Well, I say there's a time and place for everything, but our masculinity, our manhood should be on its own terms. It doesn't have to be vis-a-vis in a response to how other people frame us as men. So that's my response. In itself, to me, that's a sign of weakness in and of itself, that one feels like they have to redefine what it means to who they are based upon the vision or the gaze of other people, including people who don't even believe in Islam. Yeah. So we have our own standard. That's the uswa of al-Habib, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who of course was extremely masculine. He was physically fit. He was the most courageous of men. He was firm when he needed to be in battle. Quran mentions this, Muhammadun Rasulullah, right? Mentions him and the companions. Muhammad is the messenger of God. And those who are with him, meaning the companions, and may Allah be well pleased with them, are stern against the disbelievers, meaning in times of adversity, in times of conflict, but they are always merciful amongst themselves, the believers. And our women folk, our Muslim mothers, our Muslim wives, our Muslim sisters, our Muslim daughters are included amongst us, ruhamau bainahum. They're included amongst those we're supposed to be compassionate and merciful with. So it's not my reading of this endeavor of Futuwwah, and we take from the likes of him and from Ali ibn Abi Talib and Salman al-Farisi and the Tabi'in and those of like Zain al-Abidin, Sa'id ibn Jubair, going to Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani al-Hanbali, Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi al-Hanbali. When we read about them and see what they taught, these were men that went out on revolt. They all went out al-Jihad al-Fi Sabilillah, and they also talked about generosity and kindness. And these are examples of manhood, and this is what we learn from our mashayikh.
There are a number of qualities you stress in your chapters. So each of your chapters talks about a quality at a time. Let me pick up on a few of these qualities. You discuss loving and loathing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Explain that idea to me, please.
Okay, well, one's iman is not complete according to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, until they have al-hubbu fillah wal-bughdu fillah, is that they love for the sake of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, and they, some would say hate, but al-bughd, they loathe for the sake of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, meaning that those things that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala loves, and those people that he loves, in which those people have certain characteristics, in which there are 8 of them mentioned in the Quran, right? Yuhibbul tawabin, yuhibbul mutatahhirin, yuhibbul muqsitin, yuhibbul muttaqin, right? These qualities, we're supposed to love those qualities and love the embodiment of those qualities and those people who strive to display those qualities. El-bughd fillah, anything that Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala says he does not love. Any of those characteristics in which his anger is upon, his la'na is upon, or that he has given in the Quran al-wa'id, divine threat of punishment, we're supposed to loathe those, right? And this starts in the inside. And even if we can't speak out against those things because of particular circumstance, we should always despise those things in our hearts. And this is something that a man has to have internally. I'll give you one example, right? Yeah. We know that I'll use a term of our friend Dr. Shadi Al-Masri in New Jersey. He calls it alphabet soup.
Yes.
The alphabet soup movement. Maybe someone is in a job, right, in a particular time, because of their job role, they have to deal with many different letters of alphabet soup, right? And they may be in a circumstance where they have to give some sort of service to someone within the alphabet soup that their job requires, right? Even if that service has to be done, it should be despised and hated inside that particular letter of the soup, and that they should always loathe it, and they want that person to leave that letter within the soup, even if they can't say anything about it because of those professional reasons. La tarku illa alladhina zalamu fatamassakum an-nar. Right? Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says, don't incline inwardly towards those who are doing outward wrong. Least you should touch the fire. You should touch the hellfire, right? So, and the Prophet ﷺ said, hadith from Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, fi Sahih Muslim, if any of you sees a munkar, you should do what? To try to change it, biyadi, if you have the authority. If you can't, then resist it, bilisani, you speak out against it. But there are times that you can't, right? So you said, well, then at least resist it in your heart. Hate it in your heart, loathe in your heart. The munkar, وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, this is the weakest form of faith, if you're able to speak out against it. But sometimes there's certain circumstances that we can't speak out against. But the point of it is, real men should never be apathetic towards that which is displeasing to Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if that becomes adi or normalized amongst a group of males, this makes the community weaker. It brings weakness into the community. I've seen it in America, even in the we've only been able to make a comeback from it, right, in recent years, but socially, politically, it's weakened the community, where we have males who have appeared to be speaking on behalf of the community that had so much cowardice and or were apathetic about that which is hateful to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. They would not only speak out against it, make excuses for it, that we're supposed to support it under these are our allies. Well, that's not manly. And when people in leadership who look like men don't have this bughd for the sake of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, then it erodes having true chivalry within the Muslim community, within the prophetic paradigm.
You talk about vigilant care, ghira. This is a term that we hear actually in a way to confirm some sort of red pill masculinity on social media. So explain ghira to me, please.
Yeah, I translate it as vigilant care.
Yeah.
Because normally when we hear the word jealousy normally carries a protective jealousy normally carries a negative connotation. And sometimes people think of hasad, which of course is sinful, right? When we say protective, we're not looking at a belief or a group of people as property, right? But it is a type of vigilant care that we have spiritual investment and responsibility as men of defending. So the first thing we're supposed to have ghira for is not any person. It's supposed to be for Deen al-Islam. It's for the Quran, right? If someone goes out to slur the Quran or desecrate the Quran, we're supposed to have ghira for the Quran, right? If there is someone who's mocking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we shouldn't be apathetic about it. Like we shouldn't say, oh, let's go out and support, let's file a lawsuit to support the free speech rights of someone who wants to slur the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A'udhu billah, right? We're supposed to have ghira for the Prophet alayhi salam, ghira for his family, right? For his wives. If someone slanders his wives or accuses one of his wives of sexual immorality, right? We should have ghira for the wives. Ummahatul mu'mineen, may Allah be well pleased with him, right? Also, having ghira as men for our women folk. Likewise, I mentioned that you know, the wives themselves of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a level of ghira for him. This was one of the things that was brought up, and this can be read in the history of Ibn Kathir, of Salama radiallahu anha, right? When the Prophet ﷺ proposed to her, she hesitated, and she gave 3 reasons. And one reason was that she's mentioned she is ghira. She felt like she'd have a problem, you know, because of the other wives. And he gave her a response to that, for that and 2 other things which satisfied her, and she became one of the mothers of believers. May Allah be well pleased with her. So we should have level of vigilant care and wanting to stand up and defend the honor of that which we value, and this relates to our justice. That doesn't mean transcending or transgressing the boundaries of Sharia. The ghira has to be within the boundaries of the Sharia, the sacred law. And I've said this, I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but I've said almost every talk in response to this issue of ghira, that a real man should be willing to give his life for his wife, right? A real man should be willing to give his life for his wife. But even when it comes to protectiveness of, okay, let's go back again. We mentioned Ali, may Allah be well pleased with him. We mentioned him earlier. An example of this courage, but also this protectiveness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, we know when of Hijrah, when the Prophet alayhi salam and Abu Bakr Siddiq went to make Hijrah, it was Ali who was willing to give his life for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And also this is ways to ithar as well, right? Of his altruism. He preferred the Prophet's safety over his own safety, right? But he had so much care for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is something of manhood. So if anyone is trying to say that in our discourse of Futuwwah that we're trying to be weak or to mold ourselves to a type of so-called simp narrative of an emasculated male according to radical Western feminism. That's definitely not what we're referring to, and how we point to the Sunnah and to the way of the honorable Ahlul Bayt and the companions of the Prophet and their spiritual inheritors.
How important is it to study the battles of the Prophet ﷺ when trying to embody these great characteristics of Futuwwah and courage and the companionship and the brotherhood that comes out of that?
Well, the Al-Maghazi literature, or literature of the Ghazwa, was something that was studied by the early generations, by the Salaf. Before we had extensive books, more so on Sirah or Tarikh in Islamic history, Al-Maghazi, or this literature talking about the battles, was of the first things that was written down by the early Muslims. I believe Al-Waqidi, I believe, was of the first ones that wrote specifically about this, which At-Tabari uses. I believe that Ibn Hisham points back to this as well. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn about the different military campaigns that relate to Futuwwah. Honesty and truthfulness and intention. Discipline. Also, what happens negatively when the discipline is lost, like at Uhud, for instance, is a prime example. Courage when odds look against us or against the Muslims. Badr is a very good example of this. Mashura or Shura, like in Ghazwa Khandaq with Salman al-Farisi, with the whole issue. Actually, it's Ghazwa Ahzab is probably its proper name, but it's known as Khandaq, which is a Persian word because of the ditch.
Yes. Consultation.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things. Consultation, Shura, that came from that. Also, the different roles that need to be played. Everyone needs to play their part. Everyone needs to get in where they fit in. Everyone's not meant to do the same role, but we should all have one heart in reaching the same objective. We also learned this from the battles. Also this issue of ithar, of altruism and preferring others over oneself. And I think the Yarmouk, the Battle of Yarmouk, is a prime example of this, where we have the story of the three companions. Ikrima, Abi Jahl is one of those, right, where the Muslims had gotten wounded. A number of the companions, people there were gravely wounded. Yes. And it was very hot that day, and people were bleeding, and the water being passed around, and the water was presented to the first Sahabi, right? He saw his brother next to him that looked more injured. Give my brother the water. Then go to the next Sahabi, and he said, no, give the other brother my water. Returns back to the first Sahabi. He achieves martyrdom. Then the second Sahabi, Ikrimah, achieved martyrdom. The third achieved martyrdom. So we learned this. We see this altruism, having each other's backs. So there's so many things that could be learned that the men need to learn. And also, I think that Resurrection Ertugrul did a good job of this as well. Yes. Maybe one or two things we could say that are historically inaccurate or maybe not Shari'i compliant. Yes. But overall, I liked it because it showed this code of honor, this Futuwwah, even with the training, because in anything in life, there has to be preparation if one is looking for success, right? So there's a saying about he who fails to plan plans to fail. So we also saw this even with the Ghazwa in Ertugrul, but the Sahaba did the same thing. There had to be training, You're right. There has to be shooting of, has to be archery and practicing with the sword and doing physical exercises to get fit. But these are life lessons, and I learned this playing American football, right? I learned a lot of valuable lessons going through the rigor, the physical sacrifice, and becoming very tired and in this discipline. I learned a lot through that experience that helped me in other aspects of life later on. It had nothing to do with athletics or actually going out on a battlefield.
Imam Walid, when we talk about sacred chivalry, is there a particular prototype of a person that should come out of this tarbiyah program, or is it more of an acceptable spectrum? Because we know that from the Sahaba, Ridwan al-Alayh, we had some Sahaba who were more short-tempered than others, and some Sahaba who were far more intelligent in the way they approached a strategic problem than another one, maybe, and that isn't to belittle any of the Sahaba, but everyone had different levels of aptitude and ability and even adherence sometimes to or even sort of emotional intelligence, they call it today. And,
Yes.
and so people have different qualities. And how much is there an acceptable spectrum here because, a lot of what you say today, I'm reflecting on myself and thinking, I don't carry that, or I'm awful at this particular issue, or subhanAllah, I pray I could be better at, showing X or Y. So potentially there is sort of a danger of having, a very narrow specimen of an individual that we should be as Muslims. I hope that question.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So there should be a general baseline that all men are striving to fulfill. And keep in mind, this issue has a bidayah without a nihaya, right? As a beginning without an end. And we should all be in this mujahada from now until the day that Malakul Maut comes and takes our souls, right? But there are some basic, we could say, requirements of manhood, both according to the sacred law and to like adab and akhlaq, right, that we should have. Now, in regards to individual, there is a certain range or spectrum of acceptability within in manhood, right? Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala gave all of us different gifts, and we all come from one al-fitra, this primordial nature. But the shakila that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala gave one man, he gives to a different man, right? So for instance, we know that, like, for instance, the khasla of Dhul Nurayn, Uthman, was shyness, right? He was known to be very shy. The khasla that Ali is most known for is shaja'a, right? Is courage, right? Like on the battlefield, he's known for courage, right? Doesn't mean that Dhul Nurayn was less masculine than al-Murtada. Of course not, right? But there's a different shakila that Allah gave each one. So when it comes to under the sacred law, right, we know that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has given, generally speaking, a baseline, right? So number one, and this transcends gender, but those things that are our fardun ayn, we must fulfill, right? So lifting a bunch of weights and making a lot of money is more important to lift the bed sheets off of the bed at 5 a.m. for tahajjud, to pray Fajr prayer on time, than to lift a whole bunch of weights, right? There's priorities. A man should want to take on responsibility of taking care of his family. Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala nisa, right? And in this, we can't say that ar-rijal or rajul single also includes the women. If we were talking about ilm al-hadith, when we say ilm al-rijal, Like our mother Aisha, radiallahu anha, was a rajul. If we're talking about hadith, and her opinions on looking at some matters, she was a rajul, right? In that we can say like a man, but she was not a man in that sense. Men are the ones who are supposed to be the custodians and the ones who look out to protect women, all right? And this is a Sharia responsibility for a man being mahram for a woman to being a wali. Like a woman can't be a waliya for her daughters for marriage. That's the job of a man, right?
Yes.
That's according to the Sharia of the obligation of nafaqah. Right now, in a marriage, a woman can make more money than a man, and she could forfeit that right of nafaqah. But at the same time, that that baseline responsibility is a man's underneath the marriage. But even if he's not providing nafaqah, he's supposed to provide the physical protection of that woman if he is able to, right? So there's some basic Sharia things. Now, when it comes to sometimes there may be a man who is his emotional intelligence, that word that you use, maybe his empathy is a little more. And this causes him to be more generous, right? Because when we look at the difference between the words, at least from the linguistic aspect of as-sakhi and el-jud, for instance, in Arabic, both of these words carry the meaning of generosity. But Dr. Fadl As-Samarai, Hafidullah Ta'ala, he mentioned this relating to balagha in the Arabic language, that a person who is generous, who has, a sakhawa, right? A sakhi is one who has sakhawa. This generosity, they give when someone gives them. If someone has Jude and the Jawad, they have the emotional intelligence and empathy. They can see when a person's in need, and they will go and give that person in need even when they don't ask. This is a higher level of spirituality. All of us aren't going to have that, right? Does that mean that a person's less than a man if he doesn't have that empathy and can't spot that? No, but there's different darajat, right? There's different spiritual levels, and just generally speaking, all women aren't on the same spiritual level either. And even amongst the sahabiyat, right? There were some women that were on higher levels than other, even amongst the female companions.
One final question for you. So, alhamdulillah, I mean, this has been really enlightening, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers would like to read your book. But as you said, that this needs to be put into practice, and we need to inculcate it into our tarbiyah programs and across our madrasas around the world. We need to have a special place for Futuwwah. How do we go about doing this? Like, what are the practical steps we need to take to start on this journey?
So before going through history and theoretics, I just want to point to some people in the UK and then also in America.
Okay.
Right. So in the UK, you have Sheikh Ibrahim Osiafa, who's been dealing with this issue of Futuwwah for a while. I'm not sure if he's in Bradford now or Birmingham, but he's in the UK. You have the wonderful job that Ustad Nisar and also Maulana Asim Ayyub, who wrote the foreword there at Krima Foundation in High Wycombe. And they're doing work around this issue of Futuwwah. And they've established basically, I believe, 4 out of the 5 elements of what we could say a proper Futuwwah guild. And I'm going to explain this guild situation in a moment. We have our brother in Sweden, Sayyid Jamaluddin Miri, beautiful brother, Iranian Sunni, who's in Sweden, who works on this issue of Futuwwah. He's also worked with Dr. Recep Senturk, from Turkey, who's written about Futuwwah. I think he's in Qatar now.
Yeah.
And then in America, if you want to come to Detroit and come to Dar Rahman and Sheikh Abdul Karim Yahya and also your needy brother, we've been working on this as well. And there's been others. Sidi Hamza Perez with the Rites of Passage of Young Men in America, who's in Pittsburgh with the Sheikh Jama of Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, rahimahullah ta'ala, and Sheikh Muhammad Mendes as well, who's based down in Houston, Texas. So these are some people you can point directly at that have been involved in this endeavor of this tarbiyah Futuwwah. Now, historically speaking, let's go back. Because I mentioned for a Futuwwah guild, we have some basic, we could say like there's 5 pillars of Islam, like Buni Islam al-Khams. We can say basically there's 5 pillars of a Futuwwah guild. So there weren't guilds in the time of Sahaba, but these aspects were in the time of the Sahaba, and they were what we can say systematized under the time of the Abbasiyin, and specifically under the Sultan of An-Nasir al-Dinillah, rahimahullah ta'ala, was a man of learning and letters. He's one of the Salatin of the Abbasiyin, who was, we could say fairly just and educated. There were quite a few bad ones like El-Ma'mun and El-Mu'tasim, who put Imam Ahmed and others through horrible treatment. This was during the time of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani al-Hanbali, in the time of the Futuwwah guilds. And there's basically, you have certain things. You have first the teaching of the young males al-adab. Manners, etiquettes, comportment comes first.
Yeah.
Adab, better is, we could say, is to give everyone and everything its proper due at the proper place and time.
Yeah.
So this is a type of tarbiyah of, we could say, emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Right? So this adab is taught, and this is putting young people in environments in which they view adab continuously through repetition, and then they are placed into environments of learning adab. And I'll give some examples as I'm going through.
Yeah.
The second is a ta'aleem, where the young men have to know their religious obligations, starting firstly with what are those things that one must know properly to be a proper Muslim, right? And this is summed up in, as we were taught by our teachers, as Mel Iman, what is faith? In Hadith Jibreel. But those 3 questions were asked. Under the riwayah of Sayyidina Umar, radiallahu anhu, what is faith? What represent creed, right? What is Islam? Islam represent ahkam, this was to the 5 pillars, rulings, regulations. And then what is ihsan, spiritual beauty, excellence? This represents tazkiyah and ilm suluk, right? The purification of the heart, these 3 fundamental sciences. So first, what Islam 101, what one must know, and then the Farn Ayn that relates to this, what is Islam, should be taught. And according to one of the established madhab, right? No cherry picking and picking and choosing, because
That's it.
because one will just pick and choose according to their hawa, right? I don't believe in especially for awam, people who haven't studied a single matan of any madhab, want to say la madhab. Like, no, that's incorrect. Especially for young people who have access to all sorts of misinformation about Islam online. That's a bad message. So that's the second. The third aspect is what we can call the community service, al-khidmatul jaliyah. And this is where these things that they've been learning, especially from the adab, gets put into practice.
Yes.
Right? So part of the rearing is teaching young men how to be selfless instead of selfish, right? So, for instance, I'll give you an example in Detroit of like what we've done. So we have regular majalis. We push the young people forward, right? So what they do is that we have a khadam for the mabkhara. So there's like someone who lights the charcoal, and then for the burning of the oud during the majlis, the bakhur, right? Then there's someone who comes and serves the tea, but they learn what's the tartib, the proper order of who should be served in the majlis. Mm-hmm. The ulama and mashayikh are served first, then the elders, then you go to the younger people, and you start off serving with your right hand and going around. There's an adab to it. Also in the service, feeding people, right? We've had soup kitchens and also food banks, but it's not giving people handouts when there's a serving of food, sitting directly with the people on the same level and eating the same food they eat, right? Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani used to feed people in his madrasa. Actually, I've been to Baghdad 3 times now. I went to his masjid. That waqf that he started is still ongoing. Allahu Akbar, right? Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani said that if he was given the entire dunya in his hand, he would use it to feed the people. So it's community service. Learning this community service. The fourth of this is the sacred athletics, right? Archery is sunnah. We believe it's barakah in anything that the Prophet ﷺ did and taught the Sahaba how to do. Martial arts. There's physical fitness, but it also teaches discipline and precision in these 2 endeavors. We've had these things ongoing. Taking the young men out to learn how to ride horses, right? There's a certain respect you have to have for horses and a certain level of care. You can get thrown from that horse and get hurt very badly if you don't deal with that horse properly, right? Swimming, the Prophet ﷺ, this was something that was encouraged, right? So there's something, but there's also other benefits. It's like we've taken the young men out hunting. So in America, you can do this. You can go deer hunting. There's even like there's deer hunting season. You can go bow and arrow, but also firearm. But to go is something empowering for young men to go hunting and kill a deer or an animal or a wild turkey, and then they can eat off of what they killed according to the Sharia, right? And the last part of these that was in the traditional Futuwwah guild is the artisanship. It's learning a skilled trade. It's something empowering about learning how to do something with the hands. So in the time of the Abbasiyin, young men learned how to be a blacksmith. Horseshoes had to be made. Swords had to be made. Someone had to know how to make the arrows for the bows. Even like making jewelry, like the wearing a silver ring. This is the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. According to Sahih Bukhari and others, he wore a silver ring. There were other trades so that these young men could learn a trade to assist the ummah, but also learn a trade to know how to do something with their hands to support a family. So, of course, they were taught reading and writing, but they also were taught a skilled trade, which we could always call this industrial education. These are the 5 pillars of a proper Futuwwah guild. I think that all young men need to learn how to do something with their hands, right? We all need to be striving to be fit, right? We all should be doing some sort of service to the community. And I'm taking these backwards, yes. Right? We all need to know our religious obligations, what we must believe to be a proper Muslim, those pillars of faith, and be able to understand them, explain those to people, right? And our fard ayn, and we must be able to have proper comportment, first with Allah and his messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, even saying salawat after his name is part of the adab, not raising our voices loud in front of his qabr in El Medina, and also our adab with our mashayikh, our teachers, our community leaders, our parents if they're still alive, and then also even knowing proper adab with the youth, having proper adab with our women folk and our wives, right? All of these is what we need to be striving in our tarbiyah, in our madaris, in our Islamic centers, for programs. And needs to be investment in this material investment to help with the human capital in these things.
Imam Dawud Walid, can we have Futuwwah training for 30 and 40-year-olds as well? Because I think we have, all of us are missing these really important conversations in our community, and I think it's necessary, probably.
Most definitely. I said this at High Wycombe. Actually, this book was launched in the UK, actually. It didn't launch in America. It launched here in the UK.
Right.
But I quoted something that said in West Africa that you can't give a thirsty man a drink when your cup is empty. So we also have to have humility to know that maybe there's something that we miss coming up that we need to get and reclaim. And, there were some things that I learned from my environment I had to unlearn. And what Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio, also known as Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio, the great reviver, Mujaddid, from the Hausa land, which is now Nigeria. He talked about this in tarbiyah and rectification, is that we as men have to struggle to do what feels unnatural until it becomes natural to us. So some things maybe we learn, like some of this stuff, some of our youth have learned about this whole top G and some of this Andrew Tate red pill stuff.
Yes.
Some of this stuff we have to unlearn. Maybe on the other extreme, maybe we were raised as mama's boys, and we were pampered too much and didn't learn how to do anything for ourselves, right? Maybe some of that has to be unlearned, and we have to struggle against that, right? So we all have to do, we have to be sincere and do introspection. And I'll end with what Malcolm X said as a parallel. He said, the shame is not once to have been a criminal. The shame is to remain a criminal. So juxtaposing that or analogy, the shame is not acquired some of this tarbiyah or some of these traits when we were younger. The shame is to know that we don't have it and we are apathetic and not striving to get them now.
Can we change at any age?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can change. I can say this, that if Wahshi ibn Harb al-Habashi became Muslim, who killed one of the best men of his times, Hamza Ra'an, who then later killed the worst man of the time, the false prophet, Musaylama al-Kadhab, if he could change to go from disbelief in kufr, in treachery, to Islam, and doing the bidding of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he could do it, hey, most of us haven't committed murder or killed any people or weren't drunkards like Washi was. So yes, we can change. It's never too late.
Jazakallah khair, Imam Dawud Walid. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.